My presentation is going to be sort of a brief summary of colonial surveying practices, primary in the area of Thomas VI Lord Fairfax, Baron of Camerons, northern neck of Virginia, 5¼ million acres. That by 1746, he realized that he had all this land, and he started granting it out. Surveying practices hadn't changed very much in several hundred years. The terms, the dimensions, and all the things required remains pretty much the same even today. Whereas the old equipment I have here was used in the 1740s and 50s in this area here. Surveyors today is going out with an electronic device doing exactly the same thing in about a tenth of the time. But it still comes down to the final thing. The land is described by a line, how long it is, what direction it's going, and how much land is enclosed inside that area. Exactly today, any deed you read will read the same thing as ours did in the 18th century. A real quick summary on Lord Fairfax, which is the area I concentrate on anyway. Lord Fairfax, by 1746, had established the fact, had it established for him that he owned about 5¼ million acres of land. This map I got here is showing about the western half of it. Winchester is located right about here. So everything this way is to the east and this is to the north.
That's a good guess.
Lord Fairfax, once he realized he had all this land, needed to put it to use. It's going to do nothing just laying there. So he started doing land grants. Probably his most famous surveyor that worked for him was George Washington. Unfortunately, George Washington probably didn't do as many surveys as most people credit him for doing. But he did work in this area somewhat. His first excursion out here was in 1747 with a surveyor by the name of James Ginn. James Ginn came up into the western part of the country doing surveying in April of 47, 48. George Washington was about 16 years old. George only took it for about a month and hightailed it back to the civilized end of the northern neck and stayed there for quite some time. However, later on he did pick up his surveying again and did it for probably about 5 years as a steady occupation, and even became a surveyor of the county of Culpeper, Virginia. So he did practice it. Up in this area here, I have found documentation of at least 22 separate surveyors that worked in this area from about Ashby's Gap all the way out into the Cumberland, Maryland area, out into the farthest reaches of the neck. So there was quite a number of them. Lord Fairfax would, first of all, he would give what was called, you would submit an entry. An entry is nothing more than saying, I would like a tract of land. And you would maybe say, I would like to have it on the North Branch or on the South Fork or whatever, or you may just say, I would like to have it. This would go to Lord Fairfax's land office, which by this time is being located down outside Winchester, a place called White Post. If you were able to come up with what was called the composition money, then Lord Fairfax would issue what was called a warrant. A warrant would be given to a surveyor, giving him the authority to go out and do this land survey. The composition money for Lord Fairfax wasn't too bad. You were paying somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 shillings for 100 acres. He was giving land out at the rate of in 200 to 400 acre tracts. Some of it today would be worth millions of dollars depending on where it's located. Some of it would be sold by the square foot now in certain areas. So, but it was very affordable. Pennsylvania was charging as much as 13 pounds for an acre. So where do you think people are going to come to settle? Virginia was following about the same rates and all like that, but Lord Fairfax had his own little development here, so to speak. And so he would charge that. If you could come up with that amount of money, and almost anybody at that time could afford that, you're looking at maybe a pound, since there's 20 shillings to a pound, several hundred acres of land. The other thing too, Lord Fairfax didn't require, according to others, but it did. You could purchase that land and you didn't even have to do anything to it. Other places said you had to build a house on it, you had to plant it, and all kinds of things. He didn't care. His only stipulation was at the end of every year on September the 29th, feast day of St. Michael the Archangel, you had to pay him 2 shillings for every 10 acres, or 100 acres. That was called a quit rent. Other than that, you could pretty much do with it what you wanted to or didn't want to.
You
He
could
was very
sell,
lenient
including sell it?
Yes, yes. The only thing was, if you were 3 years in arrears on your quit rent, then you lost the property. And 3 years, that's pretty liberal, I think. So what is happening now, you're getting people moving into the area, and now, instead of just going out and knocking notches in trees, which had no legal backing in the colonies whatsoever, contrary to people say, well, there's such a thing as a tomahawk survey. That was a walkthrough. It had no legal backing until it had been done by the surveyor, it had been recorded, documented, and whatever fees and so on like that was associated with taken care of. So the surveyor now would take his warrant out into this area wherever he was supposed to go, and he would take a survey party, 3 or 4 people perhaps. The good surveyor, being shrewd, would often use the family members that he was surveying for, because guess what? You didn't have to pay them. Certainly George Washington stated that on a good day he could make 1 piece totally a day, which is over a pound, which is pretty good. A surveyor in the 18th century could easily make more than a lawyer. You know, they have to work 5 or 6 months out of the year. So anything you do to save this money would work well. It's often stated that Washington worked for Lord Fairfax. He didn't. He was an independent contractor. All the money that he made didn't come from Fairfax. It came from whoever he was doing the surveying for. So you would have to go out and locate this area. A lot of times, if you've already been there, and there's a thing that you hear a lot about George Washington. Lord Fairfax seemed to favor the young man quite well. He would give him tracts of land and portions that had already been surveyed, or the nice flat ground with no trees, no mountains, no rivers, no snakes, no nothing. While the rest of us may have to contend with such things as that mountain over on the other side. I think maybe Sally Fairfax may have had something to do with that. Anyway, I digress. So you would go out and pick a spot. Sometimes it would be we're going to start right here. Kick out in the ground, set the compass up. The compass is what's used to find the direction of the land. It's not like a compass heading, like if you're sailing a ship or something. A survey line is either to the north or to the south, so many degrees to the east or to the west. So what the surveyor would do, he would go to where it's going to start. If he knew where he wanted to go, he would set that course. If not, it was just out in the middle of an open area someplace, he'd pick a direction to go. Ideally, we tried to make the lot be 3 times as deep as it was wide. It's supposed to be nice and rectangular. Well, after a while, he found out that's not going to work because you got all kinds of cliffs and all kinds of things. But he tried to make it about a 3-to-1 rectangle as much as possible. So depending on how he wanted to line, the next thing he would do, he would send his pilot and his chainman and his line clearers out ahead of him and keep him on a direction. They would clear the leaves and sticks and things out of the way, and that's one of the reasons why the Colonial surveyor, right about this time of year, we'd be starting to do surveying. Because it's starting to get colder, the leaves are starting to come down, the bees and snakes are starting to go away, and most importantly, the Indians are starting to go back west again. The Indians didn't like us. They called this thing the land stealer. Because when they saw the surveyor come in, they knew who was coming behind us. So we had to be real careful. It wasn't unusual for survey parties to be attacked and intimidated and all kinds of issues like that. So it's another concern we had. So then the distance, I'd have 2 people in my survey team. Its job was what was called the chain. This is the chain. It's 33 feet long, and this is what was made, the distance it's measured with. It's called a 2-pole chain, or unit of measurement we used was a pole. It's 16.5 feet. It takes 330 poles to go a mile. So if I wanted to measure a mile of this tape, this chain, I got to put it on the ground 330 times, or 300 times. So think about that. You're going out maybe a 400 acres, it's about 5/8 of a square mile, so there's a lot of distance to cover through all kinds of rocks and so on. So the lead chainman would take these are called chaining pins, chaining arrows. He would pull the chain to the very end as far as he could go, stick this in the ground. The the back chain would come up to this point and just keep going and going and going until they got to wherever the line was going to stop. And the surveyor would write that distance down in his field book. Kind of looked like this. And his notes would say such things as direction, how many chain lengths, how many poles. We usually use poles now in the colonies on account of chains with two different types, and keep notes of them. Another thing we'd note, where a stream crossed the line. George Washington did a lot of surveying up in the western part of this area on the South Branch River. And some of his documents show today where that river actually was at that time. You can go back and locate some of these and see how much the South Branch River has moved back and forth in those years. So it's kind of interesting to see that. In some places it's moved as much as 400 yards compared to what Washington has documented. So probably almost half of that was probably done in '85 when the big flood came, but it's amazing to see that. So you would make this, and then you read the deeds. It says so many poles, such and such a direction to a white oak tree. Well, Providence was not good enough to plant a tree at every corner we wanted. When you go to that tree, your actual corner may be 20 or 30 feet from there. It's just a monument that you could walk up to, see, okay, there's that white oak tree. Okay, my corner's here, and then follow to the next line to a pile of rocks or 3 cherry trees or something like that, and you finally make your entire circuit around until you had the complete you completed the survey and made your documentation. That pretty much took care of the field work. Then the surveyor went into a tavern or a room or wherever he's going to be and would draw that plan up. And this is one where this is 5-sided. Some of them had many more sides than that. Most tried to be 3 or 4 or 5-sided. And he would use this to calculate the area. If Lord Fairfax told me that I was supposed to survey 400 acres, what I would try to do is get that 400 acres. I was only allowed a difference of about 5%. So I could be under a little bit or over a little bit, but it had to be pretty close. Once I had that, I would make 3 copies of this. One of them would go to the property owner, and he would get it when I got paid from him. Obviously, he's not going to do it. One went to the county, wherever it was going to be, and one went to Lord Fairfax's land office there in White Post. Once that had been accomplished, then the property owner had met all these obligations as far as the bills and all like that. It became his. Some things that happened though, in the beginning of the colonies, you were getting what was called head rights. You got a certain amount of land for bringing a certain number of people here. Well, by about 1720, that pretty much going away. Everything was what's called treasury right, where you bought it. But what was happening sometimes with people getting that, and these unscrupulous people sponsor people over here, and they were supposed to give them a certain amount of land, and the surveyor laid out for them. Sometimes your bottom land would be at the bottom of a river. There's your land, you figure out how to use it. So you wait for another 200 years to the river shifted or something like that. But this is going on in bits and pieces all over this section here. Down in here, I forget how many different surveyors have worked just in this general area we're right now. I think about 7, but in this whole western part, at least 22. Some of them went on to become more famous individuals. One's name was Wood. There's a school in Winchester named for him. There's another, Rutherford, who was a Colonial War, I guess he run a militia unit, all like that. George Washington, okay, it's interesting to see it. A friend of mine says that since so many surveyors went on to other things, they became military leaders, they became government officials and all like that. He claims Mount Rushmore is 3 surveyors and some other guy. Thomas Jefferson was a surveyor to a certain amount. George Washington did a fair amount. Abraham Lincoln, excuse me, General, in his early days was a surveyor to some degree. And then you have Teddy Roosevelt. I haven't figured out that one, but anyway. But the whole process of the survey was to locate and track the land so you could identify where it was. So, sooner or later, they all started coming together more and more and more and more. They started doing more exact surveys. But even today, you can go back and some of the real estate people I know have found some of these old deeds tracing it back into the 1750s and 60s. Some of the tracts that were surveyed were never claimed until after the 1760s at the end of the French and Indian War. Quite obviously why, because this is a map or a copy of a plat that was done in 1749 by a man named Guy Broadwater. And you look at the thing and you go, well, that's pretty nice, it's an interesting thing. This is where Kaiser, West Virginia is today. This is showing the whole extension all the way up to New Creek, and it's called the New Creek Survey. And this is the type of stuff a surveyor would put out. Many of these lots weren't claimed even until after the 1760s. A couple of them were, but they were surveyed, located, so if somebody would put in a warrant for an entry for a tract of land, Fairfax himself actually didn't do it. It was for the most part his nephew would say, okay, I got a tract of land like that up in New Creek, up in the western part. You want to go there and pay the fees, and there you have it. One of the things I think that the surveyor did, not intentionally of course, he really didn't know, what he was doing was laying the ground for our independence. Because now you have somebody coming from Germany or England, France, Ireland, Scotland, all the places like that, and now they can afford something here that he couldn't afford in Europe, and that's land. And as soon as you can own the land that you're on, what does that make you?
Landowner.
Makes you a landowner, and it makes you independent. And all at once now, I have something, and somebody on a throne across the ocean is now wanting to tax me and do all kinds of things to me. It's not going to happen. So what I think the surveyor did was completely, there was no way to know that. In 1747, we didn't know that there was going to be an American Revolution.
Yeah.
Kind of getting a little tired of their crap, but it was still it had another 20 years or so before it really started developing. But because of the fact that these people could afford the land, they could do it however they wanted to. If they didn't want to plant it, they could. If they wanted to build a house on it, they could. And now we're sitting here looking at issues where people was trying to impinge on that, and I really think that a lot of it was, not all of it, of course, that's what got the ordinary person to feel that want to be independent, want to be free. And you saw what happened in 1776 and from that time on.
Well, it wasn't until you had these people actually owned the land that the foreign government could tax them.
That's right.
I mean, if they're just like squatting or something like that, once they had title and there's a record of it, then they can target these people, and then they can get the money.
Yes.
And then there's a question of where the money goes and what we're getting back for that. Just as recently in the Scotland, you know, with Scotland.
England even taxed Lord Fairfax. He got taxed 38 pounds for judicial costs because he owned all this land. 38 pounds in the 18th century is a fair amount of money, but I don't know what it'd be now, but it'd be several $100,000 probably. Lord Fairfax himself stayed here. He was the only member of British peerage that lived in the colonies. He stayed here till he died, and when the American Revolution was over, actually he died just after the fall at Yorktown. There are people that believe that may have something to do with it. He wrote letters to George Washington even during the Revolutionary War. He was really, seemed like he took a liking to George Washington and kind of thought of him like as a son, and he really to some degree felt, I don't know, maybe disappointed or let down or betrayed or something that Washington took that side of the conflict. But nonetheless, when the war was over and everything was settled out, all the grants that Lord Fairfax had given out still stood. Nobody lost a tract of land that was current with him when they reassessed it, when Virginia then ceased being a colony and become a state, and the northern neck, of course, had always been part of the colony, but even that was all his. And of course what's happening now along the line too is we're developing more counties. Hampshire County was formed in 1757 and so like that. So by the time the American Revolution was over, this area out here was fairly populated and continued to grow after that.
Now you say that all the land grants that Lord Fairfax made were honored. Now then I'm guessing that there were land grants that other people made that weren't honored. Is that the case?
Yeah.
And why was that?
That's a good question. The whole time of the American Revolution, nobody caused any issues with Lord Fairfax, even though he was an absolute dyed-in-the-wool British subject. And it was just that the way he managed things and did things, treated people fairly and all kinds of things like that, that they just never had any issue with it.
So it would have been, if there were other people whose land grants were disregarded or invalidated, it would be because the new American government had issues with those people and their validity and their and the people that benefited from their largesse or their profit making.
There's a whole big long conflict. Fairfax had a man by the name of Yost Height, who came to the colonies in the 1720s, I think it was. He was probably of German descent, and he was a bit of a shyster to some degree. He got connected up with another group of Germans by the name of Van Meter, and some of their stuff was in this area here in Martinsburg area, down around Berkeley Springs and all like that. And this was Fairfax's land, but Thomas VI didn't know anything about it yet. The king's over, he just giving land away right and left. He didn't care who got it. You walked in, he liked the way your shirt buttoned, he'd give you some land. Well, now they're getting these
to the different lords.
Yes.
Yeah.
So somehow or other, this Van Meter got this land, and then Yost Height came into it, and he got connected. He was supposed to develop it. He was going to get X amount of land, X number of acres, and he was supposed to get so many people per 1,000 acres and this and that and this and that. And they were supposed to build orchards and all kinds of things. Well, Height was pretty shrewd in the fact that he was only giving out the terrible land. Again, river bottom? No, bottom of the river you get. Well, now all at once Lord Fairfax comes along in 1746 and 47 and said, wait a minute, that's my land. That was granted way before yours was. So the constant conflict, that conflict went on and was never really resolved until after both of them died in the 1780s. And the ironic part about it was, it was resolved in favor of Yost Height. Neither one ever benefited from it because it's long since gone. And the final thing about the northern neck of Virginia was, it took until the 1900s to establish this point here, which is basically within, there's a little adjustment there, of the boundary, the border between Maryland and West Virginia, where the line that goes north. So they bounced that back and forth, and it took almost 170 years before they finally resolved that. To get that
where the Fairfax Stone is?
Yes, sir, it is. It is.
Now, when you refer to the northern neck of Virginia, are you referring to what is now known as the northern panhandle of West Virginia?
No, sir. No, sir.
What was the northern neck?
The northern neck of Virginia, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Rappahannock River and the Potomac River and that neck of land that goes down between it. That was the original northern neck. Only about 800, 900 acres, or 1,000 acres. But the way they described it, it turned out to be this whole section from the Rappahannock River, the headwaters Rappahannock River, up where the Fairfax Stone is referred to, that all the way down the Potomac River to where it comes down.
So the northern neck of Norfolk, West Virginia claims its eastern neck.
Yes, the entire eastern panhandle was in the northern neck. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the dispute between Virginia and Pennsylvania over the land that was in between the Monongahela and the Pennsylvania?
Yes.
I have been told that just prior to the Revolutionary War, Virginia and Pennsylvania was about ready to go to war.
They were.
Over that.
They were.
And the Revolution prevented it because it came along and interceded.
Yes, yes.
And after that, nobody was interested in the battle. Could you talk of that and what you know about that?
I can't tell you a whole lot about that because I don't have a lot of facts and stuff on it, but it was basically a fact of they didn't know how far they were going to go. It was a function of where the Mason-Dixon line. They run that in the 1760s to separate Maryland and Virginia, or Maryland and Pennsylvania. It was supposed to only go over to where this meridian went straight up north. Well, when they're surveying that out, then Virginia comes over and says, wait a minute, where you're saying that line is not where it is. We're saying it's over here. Because these, throughout from the 1600s, they were granting all this land out, not knowing where they were. But the maps out in the eastern part were pretty accurate, maybe to 100 miles in. The more you come this way, a little bit of it got to be not fact, but conjecture. Coming a little bit further out to where we're at now, it was just pure fantasy. They might as well put, there are monsters here like they did on the old 14th century maps. But that's basically what it resulted to. And where they finally resolved it, I don't know if you ever noticed it, on the northern part of Pennsylvania, it has a little thing that looks like a stovepipe that sticks up there.
Chimney.
It's chimney. If they hadn't put that in there, and they stole that from New York, if they hadn't put that in there, Pennsylvania would have no land facing on Lake Erie. The Mason-Dixon line, they tried to get it as far south of Philadelphia as they could because they wanted to have the shipping come into Philadelphia. So this whole thing was just a series, and then Lord Baltimore, he gets in there, and he's just running back and forth. I want this, no, you can't have that. At one time, they believed that the Maryland line, the Mason-Dixon line, crossed, so part of the Potomac is up in Pennsylvania, part of it just is a total mess of things. Because the maps and what these kings and all like that were granting out, they really didn't know what was on the ground. And that's basically as best I can tell you about what that the north-south meridian line was. But, yeah, they had quite a conflict over it.
But didn't Virginia actually take over like Fort Pitt? They changed the name of it and everything.
Yeah.
What did they change the name to? I can't remember.
You asked me too quick, Dave.
No, that's when the French.
Yeah, it was Duquesne, the French had it, and the English turned it to Pitt.
Fort Prince George, that was Fort Pitt,
Named
on
after
Virginia.
the governor of the colony. I can't remember, was it Fort Dunmore?
Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, they
it.
changed it.
So the whole land thing was until you get much more accurate maps and so like that. And the surveyors did that. They would take our plats that we did, put them together and develop those into more accurate plats because we're doing smaller sections at a time. And they're going to be more accurate instead of some great big. That's over there 7 miles and that's 6.8 walk along. We're pacing distance and all like that. We're more precise. Nowhere near as precise as they are today, of course. But that's how it kept progressing, and we did eventually end up with what we got now. So that's pretty much, in a summary, what the 18th century surveyor would do.
Now, you have these chains, and they're all, of course, everything back then was handmade.
Yes.
One surveyor. How do you know that the chains, or is it important even that the chains are all the same length? Because there's no Bureau of Measures and Standards then.
Of course there are, sir. These are all 33 feet long. Each length is 7.92 inches. Now, first of all, look at how many joints is in that.
Yeah.
You use that thing through a couple of months, even just a little bit of wear. That thing is probably going to be 4, 5, 6 inches longer.
You bet.
I'm out here.
Like a bicycle chain.
Yes, I'm out here somewhere in what's now Hampshire County, and I break a link. You know what I'm going to do? I'm not going back to Winchester, someplace that find me a very accurate blacksmith. I'm just going to put it together and hope for the best.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure a number of the chains, if you would measure, nowhere near accurate to what they're supposed to be. But again, did it have to be in that time period? Probably not. But that was another reason for the difference.